He seems especially eager tonight. Sign it. And then our relationship is over. So I was just his stand-in for 3 years as you wished. I heard you had a breakup. Let me get you some male models. Baby. Long time no see. I miss you so much. How can she be with another man? You are mine. We're over it for good. I never want to see you again. I had been Kevin Farley's kept woman for 3 years in London's high society circles. However, on the day his true love returned to England, he handed me a property transfer agreement. Sign this, and our relationship will be over, he said. I understood. Now that his true love was back, I, the kept woman, should step aside. To show my reluctance, I put on a tearful display, as if my heart was being torn apart. Do we really have to end this? I really can't bear to part with your money, I thought to myself. Kevin's expression changed slightly, seemingly moved by my performance. His tone carried a hint of hesitation. Well, it's not entirely impossible. But before he could finish, I quickly signed my name, then swiftly packed my belongings and disappeared into the night. Not long after, his friend posted teasingly on social media. Someone tried to test his girlfriend but ended up losing her instead. Haha. Ding. This novel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. Kevin seemed particularly ravenous tonight. From the living room sofa to the floor-to-ceiling windows, kitchen, and bedroom, he ravished me relentlessly. Even when he carried me to the shower, he took me once more. In the end, I hung limply on his body like a flower petal battered by wind and rain. With my body completely soft, I climbed onto his shoulder and bit down hard. He let out a muffled groan, acquiescing to my actions. I looked smugly at the clear row of teeth marks I left behind. It was as if by leaving this mark, Kevin Farley belonged to me in this moment. Because I knew exactly what had triggered him today. His ideal love, the famous actress Winifred Granger, had returned to the country, and I was just the substitute he had kept for 3 years, only because I somewhat resembled Winifred. Afterwards, I lay exhaustive on the large bed, unable to move. After a while, Kevin walked over with a hairdryer and stood by the bedside. Get up and dry your hair before sleeping, or you'll catch a cold. I buried my head in the pillow and said in a muffled voice, No, I don't want to move. Kevin sighed helplessly, Fine. Then turn around and face this way. I knew when to quit while I was ahead, so I obediently adjusted my position, turning my damp head towards the edge of the bed. Kevin sat on the edge of the bed and began drying my hair. His slender fingertips gently ran through my hair, bringing waves of warm and comfortable sensations. I looked up at him. Even from this deadly angle, Kevin's handsomeness was striking. This face was heart-stirring from any angle. I joked. Kevin, you're so good at blow-drying hair. Have you practiced on many people? The sound of the hairdryer buzzed loudly in my ears. I heard Kevin make an affirmative sound. Many years ago, I worked at a hair salon. I was an apprentice then, responsible for washing and drying people's hair. I suddenly realized that Kevin had started from scratch. We were once classmates in the same high school. His family background was very poor. His words contained deep emotion and reminiscence of the past. Then he gazed at me, his eyes deep and focused. There seemed to be a hint of reluctance in his affectionate gaze. Kevin was too unusual today. We had lived together for 3 years and I could say I was very familiar with his expressions and habits. I felt he had something to tell me in my heart. I could only link this abnormality to Winifred's return. Winifred Granger was the ideal love in his heart, now a popular starlet in the entertainment industry. She had gone abroad to develop her career and had been gone for 3 years. I prepared myself mentally and took the initiative to break the deadlock. Do you have something you want to tell me? Lewis Grange is back. Lewis Grange is my childhood friend. He emigrated to Canada 3 years ago and is now back home for a visit. I nodded, a bit confused. I know he messaged me today. Kevin's thin lips pressed together as he took out a document from the bedside drawer. His tone was cold and ruthless. Sign this and our relationship will be over. I noticed a small black box in the drawer as well. It looked like a ring box and my heart ached. So he had even prepared a ring. Now he was eager to cut ties with me, only to propose to Winifred afterwards. Of course, Winifred had been the one in his heart all these years. Even now, there was still a faded photo of her back tucked into an album in his study. He adored it. I always knew I was just a kept woman, but I still couldn't bear to part with Kevin's money. Kevin didn't have any particular vices except for his rather high demands in the bedroom. Since we became intimate, he had given me an unlimited black card to spend as I pleased. He also took me to all sorts of business galas. I once asked Kevin what he expected of me. Like, do you prefer me to wear certain colors or speak in a particular way? He hesitated for a moment before saying, "This is my first time being a sugar daddy. I'm not quite sure how it works." He clasped his hands together in an authoritative pose. "Just be yourself. I don't have many rules." I extended my hand to him with a smile. "It's my first time being a kept woman too. Shall we learn from each other and improve together?" He paused, seemingly wanting to say something, but simply reached out and said, "All right." For a while, I was riding high and started to push my luck. Even when people mistook me for his proper girlfriend, he didn't correct them. I felt a bit smug about that. Later, I discovered that Kevin was very tolerant of me. I would occasionally throw small tantrums, but always knew when to stop. I didn't dare test his limits. I was afraid that if he got angry, he would get rid of me. After all, I doubted I could find another sugar daddy as good as him. But that day still came. A kept woman was no match for a true love. I took the contract and held it up to the light. It was a property transfer agreement for the most expensive villa in the most expensive area. Even his parting gift was generous. But thinking about how I would no longer have this life where everything was handed to me on a silver platter, I still felt reluctant to let go. To show my reluctance, I put on a tearful act as if my heart was being torn apart. "Do we really have to end this? I really can't bear to part with your money." Kevin's expression changed slightly, seemingly moved by my performance. There was a hint of hesitation in his voice. "Well, it's not entirely impossible to." But before he could finish, I quickly signed my name, wiped away my tears, and said, "Kevin Farley, I've done as you wished." I shoved the contract into his hand and got up from the bed. "I'll go pack my things now and move out immediately," I said. My legs felt weak, and I nearly stumbled. Kevin Farley, who was standing nearby, reached out to catch me, his hand pressing against my waist. I recoiled quickly, as if I'd been shocked. We weren't in that kind of relationship anymore. We couldn't cross that line. Kevin looked displeased, but that wasn't my concern right now. I should have known better than to exert myself with Kevin earlier. Now my back and waist were aching terribly. I rushed out of the room, only to return a minute later. I stood awkwardly by the door, hesitant and uncertain. Kevin's dark eyes fixed on me, the shadow from the lamp obscuring his expression. "Did you want to say something?" he asked. "The bags, clothes, shoes, and jewelry I bought using your card. Can I take them with me?" After a brief pause, Kevin growled, "Yes." His tone was rather bitter. With his permission granted, I turned to leave again. But there were too many things, so I called a moving company and paid extra for their services. They would move everything to my new home, the large villa Kevin had just signed over to me. The movers were shocked by the sheer amount of items. They called for reinforcements, for trucks and an entire moving team. Kevin sat on the sofa, looking very displeased. I knew he disliked having too many people in his house. He was somewhat of a neat freak. As I bustled past him, I reassured, "Don't worry, we'll be out of your hair soon." The workers, intimidated by his expression, kept quiet and focused on their task. "Kevin, could you stand up for a moment?" I asked, approaching him. He looked startled but complied. I immediately pointed at the sofa. "Right, let's take this too." Kevin stared at me, lips pressed thin. I explained. "I bought this sofa. It's my favorite. I'm quite attached to it. I want to take these cushions too. I like hugging them when I watch movies. And this doll, it keeps me company when I eat." Kevin's expression grew darker with each item. Finally, I ran upstairs and came back with an old pillow. This was my comfort object. Of course I had to take it. After all the moving, the house looked practically empty. I hadn't realized how much I'd bought for this place, but Kevin wasn't short on money. He'd replace everything soon enough. As for me, without Kevin as my benefactor, who else would randomly give me money to spend? I'd have to be more frugal from now on. As I was leaving, Kevin called out to me. "Mabel, haven't you forgotten something important?" I looked around the house, confused. No, I don't think so. You forgot to take me. I slammed the door shut before I could hear the rest of what Kevin was saying. The moment I got into the moving company's van and left, tears started rolling down my cheeks. Like a kite with its string cut, they flowed endlessly. The driver was startled and frantically tried to find some tissues for me. Miss, please don't cry. You're so well off. What could be troubling you? I sobbed, my voice breaking. I've had my heart broken. No, that wasn't quite right. We hadn't even been in a relationship. We'd lived together for 3 years, but we weren't even boyfriend and girlfriend. Few people knew that I truly loved Kevin Farley. I had loved him for 8 whole years. In high school, I accidentally overheard Kevin confessing his feelings to Winifred. So I buried my own feelings, hoping time would fade them away. Until 3 years ago, when my family went bankrupt. When everyone else was avoiding the Averys, Kevin appeared. By then, he was no longer the poor academic star from high school. He had transformed into a business tycoon, making headlines in all the major financial news. Back when I was still Miss Avery, I had quite a haughty temper and offended quite a few people. When the Avery family fell, those I had once looked down upon were eager to step on me. At a cocktail party, they publicly humiliated me. Worse still, some disgusting men openly talked about keeping me as their mistress. Miss Avery, I think you're quite pretty. If you come with me, you can continue living a life of luxury. I threw my drink in his face, and I knew right then that I was done for. No one would help the Avery family anymore. I ran out and crouched outside, sobbing uncontrollably. I started to regret how useless I was, unable to do anything. That's when Kevin appeared. He crouched down in front of me and handed me a card. Stop crying, Mabel. I have money, and it's all for you. With tears in my eyes, I looked up at him and asked, Kevin, do you want to keep me as your mistress too? If that's the case, I agree. My voice was still choked with sobs. Besides this reason, I truly couldn't think of any other reason why a man would suddenly give you money to spend. After a while, Kevin gave a faint in response. I took the card. The Avery family had completely fallen, but Kevin helped me pay off the astronomical debts. I was very grateful to him. I had a pretty good idea why Kevin had chosen me. It was because I looked a bit like Winifred, and Winifred had gone abroad. In high school, when we wore the same uniforms, people had mistaken us for each other. After I arrived at the new house, the moving company helped me organize everything. I holed up in the villa for an entire day before receiving a message from Ethel. Heard you got dumped. Come out for a drink. I'll get some male models for you, I replied. How did you know? She sent over a picture. When I was moving out of Kevin's place, someone from our social circle had snapped a photo. Below were a few chat messages speculating that I, the kept woman, had been abandoned. Come quickly. It's rare to be able to meet up with you. Ethel was one of the few people who knew I loved Kevin. The music exploded in my ears. I didn't expect Louis to be here too. As soon as he saw me, he came over and put his arm around my shoulders. We had grown up together, and this was his usual gesture. Mabel, darling, long time no see. I've missed you terribly, he said. Louis was very handsome and fashionably dressed. He was especially manly when he wasn't speaking in his affected voice. Unfortunately, while we differed in gender, our preferences were the same. We both liked men. When he put on his act, his voice and mannerisms were even more coquettish than mine. In the VIP booth, 6 or 7 male models were lined up, with Ethel sitting in the middle, her arms around 2 of them. Babe, you're here, she said, turning to the models. Gentlemen, my friend's in a bad mood tonight. You'd better put on a good show. The models all nodded, each putting on their professional smiles, ready to begin their performance. As the music played and the lights flashed, the atmosphere in the booth gradually heated up. I followed Ethel's lead, drinking and chatting with the models, trying my best to immerse myself in this night of revelry. We played drinking games, and Louis, who had drunk quite a bit, collapsed onto me, clutching my arm tightly. Just as we were in the thick of it, a familiar figure suddenly appeared at the edge of the booth. It was Kevin. His gaze cut through the crowd, locking directly onto me. I felt a bit caught out. In our 3 years together, Kevin had never liked me coming to places like this. Whenever he caught me sneaking out, he would always express his displeasure in some way. His expression was complex as he looked at the unconscious Lewis in my arms. His eyes were full of anger as he strode towards me. "Mabel Avery," he called out. I sprang to my feet with a start. In that instant, Kevin Farley was already in front of me. Lewis Grange was quite drunk. As I stood up, he toppled over, mumbling discontentedly. "Babe, what are you doing?" "Babe." Kevin's teeth were practically grinding. "You couldn't wait to leave me, just to be with him?" he demanded incredulously. His eyes filled with anger and hurt. We had always treated Lewis like one of the girls. Occasionally, he would call us babe too, but it was merely a term of endearment between friends. Ethel remained silent in the booth, watching the drama unfold. I instinctively began to explain. "No, it's not like that. Don't misunderstand. Lewis and I are just friends." Only after I'd finished did I realize we no longer had any relationship. Why was I explaining so much to him? Damn muscle memory. "Friends. You were embracing each other." He clearly didn't believe me. His attitude instantly irritated me. With a hint of defiance, I retorted. "What right do you have to dictate who I'm friends with? Who I embrace? Who are you to me?" He had ended our relationship himself, and now he was trying to control me again. Hearing this, Kevin was stunned for a moment. But then, as if overcome by rage, he grabbed my wrist and pulled me out. I looked back at my good friends. Lewis was unconscious from drinking while Ethel lay in a male model's arms wearing a helpless expression. So much for friendship. Kevin dragged me into a private room. As soon as we entered, he pinned me against the door, like a lion lurking in the darkness, eyeing its prey. I could even smell the faint scent of alcohol on him. He had indeed been drinking, otherwise he wouldn't have lost his composure like this today. "Kevin," I called his name softly, trying to bring him back to his senses. But he wouldn't listen, seemingly completely controlled by his emotions. His movements suddenly became rough. His lips pressed violently against mine, with a force that seemed almost to devour me. His arms wrapped tightly around me, making it hard to breathe. This kiss was different from his usual gentleness. It was full of possession and urgency, as if trying to prove something through this act. I gradually began to be swept up in his emotions. In the quiet room, our breaths intertwined, just like countless times before. The shoulder of my dress had slipped down at some point. A crisp phone ringtone broke through the air, ringing several times. Kevin frowned and stopped, reaching into his pocket for his phone. This action jolted me back to reality. On the phone screen were two glaring words. Winifred Granger. My heart suddenly ached. Before he could answer, I shoved Kevin away. Tears began to escape from my eyes. I quickly adjusted my clothes and said to Kevin with reddened eyes, "Kevin Farley, we're completely over. I never want to see you again." Then I turned, pushed open the door and ran out. I don't know why Kevin acted like this today. Perhaps it was years of possessiveness at work, but he can't keep entangling with me when he has Winifred. One can't have it both ways. Ethel eyed me with a curious look, but upon seeing my tears, her tone changed to one of concern. "Mabel, are you all right?" she asked. I quickly wiped away my tears and grabbed my bag. "I'm fine. Please take care of Lewis for me. I need to go." That night, I had a dream about all the little details of when I first met Kevin Farley. During those 3 years of my youth, Kevin occupied all my heart's flutters and affections. In the end though, I left the scene with regret. After that day, I didn't see Kevin for quite some time. In truth, our current social standings and positions were no longer compatible. Unless deliberately arranged, we wouldn't have the chance to meet again. I had studied fashion design abroad in university, so I decided to establish my own clothing brand. Ethel and Lewis expressed their support and made small investments. I became busy dragging Ethel and Lewis along, determined to make a big splash. I didn't want to sit idle and deplete my resources again, or be like a daughter that could only rely on others. I used to depend on my parents, but then my family's business collapsed. After that, I relied on Kevin, but now we've parted ways. From now on, I only want to rely on myself. Every day I was run off my feet, juggling design work, visiting factories, and selecting fabrics. Meanwhile, Kevin seemed to gradually fade from my life. My brand began to take shape. Due to its unique designs and some minor recognition, The first batch of clothes produced so quite well. However, I never expected that Lewis would end up in the police station for getting into a fight. When I went to bail him out, I discovered that the person he fought with was actually Kevin. Lewis had a bruise on his face and looked at me pitifully with teary eyes when he saw me arrive. Kevin was on the other side, lips pressed together, looking displeased. "What happened?" I asked. Neither of these two were typically the type to get into fights. "Ask him." I was just relaxing at a pub when he saw me and started hitting me. "Boo-hoo." Lewis cried as if he had suffered a great injustice. I turned my gaze to the silent cabin, about to speak, but he beat me to it. "Mabel Avery, are you sure you want to be with someone like this?" he said, his voice tinged with anger. He was embracing another woman and dancing with her in the pub. "Do you still want to like someone who cheats like this?" His obvious display of emotion was very unlike his usual demeanor. "What are you talking about?" I didn't quite understand. "What cheating? I'm a single young man. Who am I cheating on?" Lewis protested. Kevin's inquiring gaze darted between us. After hearing this, I had a guess about what was going on. Could he have thought that Lewis and I were together? "Kevin, I think you might have misunderstood something," I said, trying to ease the tension. Although we weren't together anymore, I didn't want things to get too ugly. Kevin was silent for a moment, then slowly spoke. "You two aren't together?" I sighed and decided to explain clearly. "Lewis and I are just friends. We're not together, so he hasn't done anything like cheating." "I think you've really misunderstood him." Lewis chimed in from the side. "You hear that? Now apologize to me," but Kevin's eyes suddenly lit up, as if with a glimmer of joy. "Really? You don't like him?" I was confused by his words but still explained. "Where did you get the idea that I liked him?" "The person I've always liked is you," I thought to myself. Lewis pointed at me and then himself. "Us two? Do we look like a couple to you?" Both Lewis and I shook our heads simultaneously. We've been best friends for so many years. Who could have mistaken us for a couple? After a moment, Kevin spoke. "I'm sorry. It seems I really did misunderstand." Kevin's assistant finally arrived at that moment. As we left the police station, Kevin caught up with me. "Mabel, let me give you a ride," he said. I was caught off guard by the sudden use of my familiar nickname. I held up my car keys. "No need. I drove here." I got into the car with Lewis and drove away. A few days later, the alumni group chat suddenly exploded. Ethel shouted in the studio, "Bloody hell. Winifred Granger got married?" My heart skipped a beat, instinctively assuming Winifred had married Kevin, until Ethel held her phone up to my eyes. In the photo, Winifred was arm in arm with another man, smiling radiantly. Winifred actually married the head boy from the class next door. What shocking news. I don't remember them having much interaction in secondary school, do you? I stared at the photo in a daze. Her groom wasn't Kevin Farley after all. As I scrolled through my phone, I inadvertently saw a post from Kevin's friend tagging Kevin, the tone teasing. Someone tried to test his girlfriend, but she ran off instead. Ha ha ha. I didn't know who he was referring to, but perhaps it was about Winifred. Meanwhile, Kevin started appearing frequently around me. He would show up daily like he was clocking in, sometimes on the street, sometimes at cocktail parties, or when I was discussing projects. He never came to bother me, but he was always there. Every time he saw me, he had an expression like he wanted to say something but held back. I knew why. Winifred had gotten married, so he remembered me as her substitute again. That day, I worked late designing, and when I left, I saw Kevin's car still parked outside. Feeling somewhat exasperated, I decided to have a frank conversation with him. I reached out and knocked on his car window. The window lowered, revealing his somewhat weary face. "Kevin, we need to talk." I opened the door and sat in the passenger seat. The first thing I noticed was that the pink car ornament I had bought was still there. We had never had an honest conversation before, each harboring our own thoughts. But now, I wanted to have a proper talk with him. "Kevin, what exactly do you want? You said it yourself before, we're over. It's completely finished. Do you understand? Stop trying to find someone else's shadow in me. I'm not Winifred." I stared at him, my tone serious. There was still a slight bitterness in my heart. I thought I had completely let go. Before, he had treated me as a substitute, but he had also helped save my family. It was a mutual agreement. I couldn't and shouldn't blame anyone. Plus, Kevin had been good to me until he ended our relationship himself. But now I no longer wanted to be a substitute. I was unwilling. This just wouldn't work anymore. The car was silent for a few seconds. Kevin's eyes were slightly red, with visible bloodshot whites. His voice was a bit hoarse. Mabel, I don't understand. I never meant to end things. I regret it. He spoke each word with utmost seriousness. I waved my hand impatiently. All right, I don't want to hear this. You said those words yourself. Regret is useless now. Don't come looking for me anymore. Since Kevin didn't seem to have the attitude for a proper talk, I just wanted to cut things off cleanly. Then I tried to open the car door to get out, but it was locked. I turned back to look at him, my eyes questioning what this meant. The next second, I was forcefully pulled into his embrace. Kevin hugged me tightly. I struggled a couple of times. He seemed to have a complete emotional outburst and began pleading. Please listen to what I have to say. In the end, I softened and gave up struggling. He started explaining, as if finally opening up. I never saw you as anyone's substitute. You've always been unique in my heart. I don't want to keep going on with you without a proper relationship. I want to start over with you, with marriage as the goal, but you only had Louis in your heart. I was insanely jealous of him. Why couldn't I have been the one who grew up with you since childhood? So I kept working hard, striving to become worthy of you. Mabel, after all these years, could you really not sense my feelings for you? Even after everything I've done, can't you turn around and look at me? His tone was aggrieved, as if upset that I had ruthlessly abandoned him before. It was the first time Kevin had said so much with a hint of desperation. I was stunned, hearing him say the word like, Kevin liked me? But when did I ever like Louis? What? As he spoke, Kevin seemed to start crying. I felt Kevin's shoulders trembling slightly. His breathing became rapid, and I could feel his tears seeping through my clothes onto my skin. A complex mix of emotions welled up inside me, surprise, confusion. Kevin, stop crying. Let's talk this through clearly. I said softly, trying to calm him down. He looked up, tears glistening in his eyes. It was a vulnerability I had never seen in him before. So does this mean you're willing to give me another chance? He asked, his voice choked with emotion. My emotions were incredibly complex. I had never heard Kevin say these things before. Were these words true or false? I dared not be certain. We had never truly opened up to each other and had a proper conversation. I reached out to wipe away his tears. Do you really like me? You're not joking? He nodded. Why did you think I liked Louis Grange? I was curious about this question. No wonder Kevin always had an inexplicable hostility towards Louis. In our final year of sixth form, I accidentally saw it. He was hugging you and saying you were his girlfriend, his childhood sweetheart. You agreed. I didn't really remember the incident he was talking about, so I thought back for a moment before it came to me. At that time, there was a girl who fancied Louis, always clinging to him. Unfortunately, Louis wasn't interested in girls, but he didn't want others to know. So he came to me and Ethel for advice. Ethel pushed me forward. Why don't you just say you two are together? Louis immediately pleaded. Please, please if it works, I'll buy you both bubble tea for a month. I nodded. All right. So during lunch break that day, Louis invited the girl to the rooftop and introduced me as his girlfriend and childhood sweetheart while hugging me. I was on the rooftop at the time and overheard what you said. I couldn't believe this incident had caused Kevin to misunderstand for so many years. I explained the whole situation to him in detail. Kevin's eyes gradually brightened. Now it was my turn to ask a question. How do you explain that love letter, the one you wrote to Winifred Granger? I saw it with my own eyes. Kevin's tone became urgent. It wasn't me. I didn't write it. I've never written a love letter to anyone. That letter wasn't written by me. It was Clive Patel who asked me to deliver it to Winifred. Clive Patel. I remember now. Clive Patel was the former captain of the class next door, and now she's Winifred's husband, Kevin, as if pledging his loyalty, said. Winifred and I have always been just ordinary classmates. The three of us were participating in the same competition at the time, so we attended the same prep class. It was Clive who didn't dare give the letter to Winifred himself, so he asked me to deliver it for him. Mabel, I really had no idea you would see it and misunderstand that I liked Winifred. If I had known, I would never have agreed to help, no matter what. You've always been the only one I liked. After A-levels, I wanted to confess to you, but then I found out you had gone abroad. Kevin lowered his head. Then why did you still keep in touch after returning to the UK? And what about that silhouette photo in the study? It's because our company happened to have some collaboration with her. As for the silhouette photo in the study, do you really not know who it is? After hearing this, I fell silent for a while, sorting out my emotions. So, the silhouette photo in the study was of me? So for all these years, we had actually liked each other? We had been misunderstanding each other all this time, and so many years had passed. I leaned back in my seat, narrowing my eyes. On the surface, I was calm, but my mind was in turmoil. But I also realized one thing. That is, I still like Kevin Farley now. But I also understand the reason why we ended up in this situation today. It's because we've never had a deep conversation and the misunderstandings between us kept piling up, pushing our hearts further apart. We started in a muddle and ended in a muddle. A glimmer of relief flashed in Kevin's eyes. Now that you know everything, can you give me a chance? His expression was serious. Mabel Avery, will you be my girlfriend? With the intention of marriage, I let out a long sigh. Deep down, I knew I wanted to give him a chance, to give us both a chance. Kevin, we can take it slow. I need time to sort out our feelings and truly get to know each other. What exactly caused us to misunderstand each other for so many years? We both have issues to address. Kevin's face finally broke into a smile. He held my hand tightly. Mabel, I'll prove it to you. I knew this would be a new beginning for our relationship. After that day, Kevin moved in with me, luggage and all. He said it was to better understand each other. We started dating like a normal couple, going out for meals, shopping, and watching movies. Kevin held my hand and said, I've always wanted to do these things with you, but I was afraid you wouldn't like it. The only difference now was that I had my own career. I was often very busy. Kevin never interfered with my work. Sometimes when I was struggling with a design, he would even offer inspiration and ideas. He said, if you want to be a delicate vine, I'll be the strong tree for you to cling to. If you want to soar like an eagle, I'll be the wind beneath your wings. Ethel seemed unsurprised that we were back together. I always knew you liked him, she said. Back in high school, the way you two looked at each other was so sickly sweet. What kind of just friends bring each other breakfast every day? And him tutoring you all the time. I certainly don't do that with my friends. After all these years, you've got what you wanted. I'm happy for you. But if you ever change your mind and want to run away from the wedding, I've got your back, Lewis grumbled. So I was just a pawn in your love game. That evening, after washing up, I sat in the study working on design sketches. Kevin came in with a hairdryer to dry my hair, fussing like a mother hen. Remember to dry your hair properly or you'll catch a cold, he nagged. I know, I said, finding him a bit annoying. After drying my hair, Kevin lingered, unwilling to leave. Finally, I looked up from my sketches, unable to ignore him any longer. Kevin, what do you want? In the next moment, he picked me up and set me on the desk. His Adam's apple bobbed as he asked, May I kiss you? His words reminded me of our first time together. It was soon after I had moved in with him as his kept woman. I had deliberately wandered around in skimpy nightwear. Finally, he couldn't resist anymore. He took off his glasses, pulled me close, and asked, May I kiss you? Things escalated quickly after that. I wrapped my arms around his shoulders in response. It was clear I wouldn't be finishing those design sketches tonight. I never imagined that after so many years, Winifred and I would become friends again. It's as if some mysterious force has bound us together. After my studio got off the ground, I had been looking for a brand ambassador to further increase our visibility. I looked at many celebrities, artists and models, but wasn't satisfied with any of them. That was until I came across a photo online of Winifred wearing one of my designs. She seemed born to perfectly embody that piece of clothing. That same day, the items she wore sold out completely. I had to admire her influence. So I asked her to be my brand ambassador. It turned out to be the right decision. My brand's recognition increased dramatically, and the studio received an invitation for an international exchange abroad. The timing was incredibly tight. I packed my bags and left that very day, intending to tell Kevin once I arrived overseas. To my surprise, he chased me all the way to the airport. With reddened eyes, he gripped my hand tightly, refusing to let go. "Are you planning to leave the country and never come back, like before?" he asked. I felt mischievous and wanted to tease him. "Yes, so what are you going to do about it?" I replied. He panicked and immediately took out his phone to search for tickets. "Then I'll follow you abroad. I'll keep chasing you no matter what," he said. Seeing how anxious he was, I suddenly felt guilty and decided to stop joking. "Are you really just going for 2 days?" he asked, half believing. I nodded. "I'm just going for a quick exchange and then I'll be back. I promise, as soon as it's over, I'll return immediately." He reluctantly saw me off to the plane. Before I left, I whispered in his ear, "Kevin Farley, when I get back, let's get married." On the day I returned to England, Kevin came to pick me up. As I walked out of the airport gates pulling my suitcase, I spotted Kevin immediately. He stood there, tall and straight, his eyes filled with anticipation and nervousness. He approached me, took my luggage, and with trembling hands, pulled a ring box from his pocket. I recognized it instantly. It was an incredibly expensive pink diamond ring. I had once casually mentioned it. Its name was Capture My Heart. "I never had the chance to give you this ring before," Kevin said, his voice quivering slightly. His eyes were full of sincere emotion. "It represents my promise to you. I hope it can capture your heart, just as I hope my heart can be captured by you." Finally, he slipped it onto my finger. "Well, you'd better hold on tight then, because I'm not letting go either." Extra chapter: Kevin's perspective. On the first day of year 10, I met a girl. I helped her move her desk, and then she pulled a chocolate bar out of her pocket and handed it to me, saying, "Thank you, classmate." The chocolate bar had strings of English words on the wrapper, looking quite expensive. I hadn't eaten breakfast that day, so I ate the chocolate bar. Later, during military training, she stood in front of me. Every time I looked down, I saw her ponytail swinging back and forth. She often slacked off when doing some exercises. Until I saw her reach into her pocket, find nothing, and start to collapse. Luckily, I was quick enough to catch her. I guess she probably had low blood sugar from not eating. I felt a bit guilty because I had eaten her chocolate, which led to her low blood sugar. So when she said, "Am I going to die?" I replied, "I won't let you die." When I took her to the school infirmary, she was still holding my hand. Until her friend came. It turned out her name was Mabel Avery. Quite a nice name. She even stood up for me. She seemed like a good person. I just didn't expect we would have more interactions. After all, how would a young lady like her, born with a silver spoon in her mouth, want to interact with me? The day Mabel appeared with the school uniform, the sun rose in my world. She used a careful tone, protecting my fragile self-esteem, because I couldn't afford the school uniform. To protect my self-esteem, she deliberately said the uniform was her brother's. Later, many times to protect my self-esteem, when she brought breakfast, she would always say, "I can't finish this, I don't want to waste it." "Kevin, can you help me eat it? Please." "Kevin, I hate this milk." "You can have it, don't complain." She appeared like the sun with an undisguisable radiance. So dazzling that I dared not touch. When you like someone, you become self-conscious, even more so for me. She was a princess born in a castle. I was just a speck of dust on the ground, so I buried my feelings for her in my heart. I just didn't expect that she had already liked someone in her heart. It was her childhood sweetheart. They had similar family backgrounds. A perfect match. Her kindness to me was just because she had always been a good person. If it were someone else, she would probably do the same. But I still couldn't give up. After the A-levels, I bought flowers, wanting to confess to her. I wanted to tell her that I would work hard, strive to give her a better life. If she was willing to give me this chance. But she disappeared. Vanished without a trace. I could no longer contact her. Until 4 years later, I heard she appeared at that cocktail party and I rushed over without delay. My son appeared again. This time I don't want to let go.